IEBC, because I know we mentioned IEBC, and I heard our colleague from UNDP saying they know nothing about the elections. If I know nothing about what I'm meant to be doing, why am I being employed? I'm being employed because politically I am going to be there to ensure that political interest. Will that change with the 2027 election? Do you truly believe that the 9 or 7, commissioners who are going to come in and chair will not be looking after the political interests of specific parties? I don't. So the question that we should be asking ourselves is if it will be as it's always been, that our electoral commissioners are, by far and large, political, appointees, then we need to have measures in place, whether it is through agencies like UNDP ensuring that they do understand what they do, their watchdogs like ELOG and LG ensuring that there are systems put in place. I do not see a case where it will be very different this time round, whether we have Cherera 4 or 10 or whatever it is, versus the rest. And the chair of the Electoral Commission, I question every day whether this will not be someone who Kenyans will be asking themselves, who is going to be pulling the strings of this gentleman of good lead. Okay. So those were my thoughts on the judiciary. AI, election technology, how do we balance innovation and manipulation? I tell you, AI is so dynamic today, and I think it's been mentioned that when we conduct polls and then we find that people who are perhaps very happy with the results or not happy with the results go and use AI to manipulate those polls. It takes me about maybe 5 minutes to determine whether that was actually our result, because it is so perfect. It's actually better than what we do. So the question then is, as we edge closer to the elections, how will we be able to deal and decipher? How will the citizenry be able to deal and decipher what is misinformation, disinformation that is AI generated? And this being the Silicon Valley of Africa, I can only imagine just how dynamic it's going to be. It will probably be the worst we've ever seen, such that we would see you speaking, they would see me releasing a poll, and it's not. Exactly. And then it takes. That's where we're leading to. So you have a poll that's been released and you've released nothing. But by the time you can convince people that it isn't actually you, it's already fact.
The damage is done.
The damage is totally done. And so I think those are things that one needs to be thinking about now. Chair will also, Dennis is saying the chair will release results, and it is AI generated, and it's not.
Yes.
And it has gone viral.
Yeah.
And we're believing that as opposed to something else, and what that does to actually, the trust in elections. But having said that, in terms of communication, I think the thinking must also be that when we have this very good discussion that we're having here, which are very valuable, how do they get down to the grassroots? Because that then becomes part of awareness and knowledge creation. Sometimes I get the feeling that we do not take very seriously or respect our vernacular channels, which are very powerful. The alternative media. We have bloggers today who are so powerful in terms of their reach that you can't ignore them. Will these be, questions or options that IEBC and people dealing with elections management think about? Or we will stick to legacy media, where we are spending, tons of money on Citizen, on Nation, etc. And we have all these Gen Zs who have created the alternative media, who then can actually, ensure that information is synthesized, as somebody said before. When we saw them during their protests, they were able to synthesize information very easily, particularly for their own polls. So we need to then be looking at those alternatives and how we then use digitization for the betterment of our elections management. Now we have the police. I don't know whether it was one of the things that was mentioned for me, but I thought to talk about the police. Are they guardians? I ask myself, for perpetrators of election violence. I ask you, because only 33% of Kenyans trust the police. But how critical are they, in ensuring there's law and order, and they're the custodians when we are conducting elections and that whole cycle? And so the effective policing, policies, people-centered policing policies really need to be enhanced and, mainstreamed. I think I've mentioned what I could have with regards to IEBC leadership and the electoral timelines. We know about, the failures of actually doing things in good time. I think it was mentioned by speakers. We heard them speak that there were things that were being done, including the, breathing into life of certain bills in the last minute, and what that does to trust. So finally, because I am a pollster, what do you need to have free and fair elections? You need an independent IEBC. Ask yourself if we will have one and what we need to do. We need an independent and truly judicial judiciary. I have seen the former LSK chair. What's the guy's name? Harvey. Harvey wants them all. Harvey wants everyone. And how many actually should what hair go on? Then there's the people-centered police and what they've been doing and the fear that they have actually, I think, instilled on the young people and marginalized groups. How will we deal with that? But we need that to be, free and fair. Then we have the media. And I think what has happened to media, I think for me, food for thought, is that the media houses, what did we see yesterday or the day before? We saw the PS for communication saying he was going to pull away advertising. The lifeblood of media houses is advertising. Without advertising, the media house is nothing. Now, my question, therefore, is, and maybe some of you have experienced, is that how much is it that media houses, journalists, reporters are asking you for any form of brown envelope to actually, because they're not being paid. Now, if they're not being paid now, can you imagine what happens in 2027 when Standard Group has not gotten any advertising? They don't have revenue. Nations' revenues are going down. It is he who pays the pipe who will call the tune. And if media is one of the most trusted, then I think as we look at what happens in enhancing, IEBC, we should also be looking at what we should do to enhance those institutions that people trust, like the civil society and the media. And then finally, when you have all these things, you also need Prof and I, because we are the ones who actually give you the views of the people, so that then there is no misinformation coming out to the public. So when you ask the question, what was the role of polls in the last election? One, we measured public sentiment on electoral issues. We told the public, we told the political class, and we told the IBC what key issues needed to be addressed. We also, discussed the issues of election preparedness and the trust that is linked to that. So do Kenyans really feel that we are prepared to conduct elections? And in many cases, they said no. Now that links to apathy. Because if I don't think you're prepared, particularly with the youth, the young, the Gen Z, they say, I won't bother. Now, how many of us knew young people who said, just culminating to elections, I had them in my house, they said, no point. And then when things started going wrong, they would come to you with a smug look and say, what did I tell you? Yeah. So that, and
One more minute.
Voting intentions. I am engaging you. So as I ask the question, voting intentions is something that polls have done, and also candidate preference. Now, the interesting thing in closing is that the politicians, the political class, use public opinion polls to conduct their primaries. Did you know that all primaries were conducted using polls? So ODM used polls. They used us. not DNA, UDA used a pollster. The first person to have done it was Alfred Mutua with his small party then. He tested, he said, I don't need to. I believe in numbers. So if they believe in numbers when they're doing their primaries, what then makes them come out and pronounce that polls are the worst thing ever and then Angela or whoever it is a villain? It is because of the power that these numbers hold. They inform the populace, but they also have the ability, whether we like it or not, Prof, I think this is true, that they can influence behavior. So that if you see something in the polls saying so and so is not doing a good job, you will say, well, I'm not going to vote for them. I thought it was just me, but it seems that it's everyone in my constituency who thinks this way. So next election, I'm not voting for this person. So I think in closing, Winston Churchill said, democracy is the worst form of governance, apart from all the others.
Yes.
I think as we sit here, I would posit that opinion polls are the worst form of garnering public perception in a scientific manner, apart from all the others. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think a worthwhile engagement. Quite a lot to take up from that, but I will only center on very few things, maybe 2 or 3 things. So the effective communication bit has been a recurring theme from the different speakers. You've also touched on it. But I think something else is emerging. I think that's part of the problem of the equation. Effective communication is part of the problem, but not fully. And when you talked about the police, when you talked about the judiciary and the others, I think the other issue is it's about responsive action to what we are hearing from the public, from these actors who form the electoral governance landscape. Are they responding effectively to what they're hearing? And are they actually prioritizing what the public are saying is important? Because you can effectively communicate action, but it's not the action the public are prioritizing. So, like the political class is obsessed, like you highlighted, who will be the commissioners of the IEBC. You've talked about data that says it's about an overhaul of the IEBC. So what are you really responding to effectively? Are the people feeling that response, and then are you communicating it as well so that they understand that these are the needs we prioritize, and this is how we are reflecting them in improving the electoral system? So I think there's actually effective communication on one side, but also the responsiveness to what's been prioritized. Again, with what you closed with, Angela, I became quite intrigued that conventional media actually has high public trust, because everything else you said after that, for me, suggests they should be in a precarious position. So it was quite interesting to see that there's still quite a lot of public trust there. But then again, a lot to think about in the future, both I think for pollsters and also other media actors, people who are engaged in public communication, because you've said numbers don't lie. I think another common balance is also facts don't care about feelings.
Yeah.
But then something you mentioned, Angela, for me has become interesting. The landscape is growing. So even when you talk about media actors, it's becoming quite diverse. We've spoken about influencers. There's what you call new age media, people who don't ascribe to things like media ethics or standards that conventional media ascribes to, but they have platforms, they have reach, and they are also occupying the spaces that you would ordinarily also occupy within public communication. So, like, what I'm driving at is you have an emergence of, so to speak, thought leaders who are not as invested in processes, models, and ethics as you are, as researchers, pollsters, and conventional media, but they have the pulpit. And in some contexts, it's emerging that they're also beginning to control a lot of public perception. How do you deal with that going forward? Do you feel like you're in an increasingly constricted space for, in engaging in and shaping public discourse, or do you feel safe in the position you're in vis-a-vis what new age media is doing? I think that's something we should also debate and engage with. Now, before I open it up entirely, Anne managed to join us. Anne? So I know you've come in quite at the tail end, but since you're here, I'll just give you the floor to share whatever thoughts you might want to contribute to the discussion, maybe 3 to 5 minutes, and then I can open it up to the rest of the group and you can interact also on that basis from some of the comments and questions that come from the group. But any initial thoughts you'd like to share?
Oh, you need for streaming. We need to go all the way.
Someone might have to hold it for you.
Okay, all right. Okay, thank you, Andrew. Yeah, thank you, Andrew. Sorry, I'm late. I'm from another engagement on the other side of town. Then there's Safari Rally and all, what have you. But anyway, my initial reflections on the topic on election administration. We are going to an election in 2027, and as it were, the IBC is at limbo. I know the selection panel is at work trying to get us new commissioners, but a full plate awaits the new commission that comes in. And what comes to mind is the people who will get into this office, either they will not sleep or they will move in adrenaline in terms of the legal framework, in the by-elections, the procurement of election technology, the financing of IEBC, and the legal frameworks that need to come, that needs to be put in place. So now, as the Uchaguzi platform or people who observe elections, are we going to sit, wait, watch? Are we going to form an advisory opinion on issues that form this country? One of the things that I'm sad about is the issue of voter registration that until now, since the last election, has not taken place. And the only thing that is making it not happen is that there is no one to gazette the registration officers. But we are here. Can we ask for an advisory opinion in the Supreme Court, for example, on what it means on continuous voter registration as per the Constitution of Kenya? Once we have that advisory opinion, then maybe going forward, we can see how it can be able to, we can go around what we are experiencing in the country in terms of the political limbo. Then again, our constitution does not envision us to have vacancy within the IEBC. As again, Uchaguzi people, what is it that we can do or make recommendations so that every election cycle that comes and goes, the political class are not left to choose or to determine for us the political future of our country. Then my last bit is on the issue of communication. And this is a place where I know there are 9 directorates within the IEBC. And my greatest and biggest recommendation is that the next IBC that is coming into place, they should have a directorate separate, which is called strategic public communication, so that we are not left for politicians to come and communicate to us the issues of IEBC, whereas an IEBC can speak for themselves. So those are my few reflections.
Thank you very much. I think very concise point. So you've been a lot of talking from the panelists and myself, particularly. So I'd like to open the floor before I go back to the panelists. And I know some of you have noted some of the questions I directed back at you. Please also note some of the questions or comments that may come from the wider group so that you then have an opportunity to respond conclusively. So the floor is open. Any additional thoughts, contributions to what we've discussed around election management and administration? Well, you had a question, but let's start with him and then we'll come to you. No, please proceed.
Wow, shut down by that group. That's why I always defer to them because they say you've talked. Yeah, thank you so much. I hope she took some note on what you asked on the impact of the external influence in withdrawing their engagement with us. I'm not very sure myself whether that engagement has been positive or negative, but there's that withdrawal, so there's an issue. I just want to make 2 observations here very quickly. Of course, now we are discussing, I think 2027. This is, I'm not very sure whether where those elections are going, but it's 2027. And the focus is the voter in 2027, the person who's going to vote. I think that's the focus, Professor. The assumption, of course, that that voter is a responsible citizen because he will use the vote to arbitrate various conflicting issues. So the first assumption we make that that voter is a responsible citizen. The definition of that voter of what in their view is the national interest on which is going to vote, it's like mine. We do not differ between that vote and me. We do not differ on our understanding of what the national interest is. That is at issue. That's the understanding. If we differ on that, then we have an issue immediately. I think, Prof, you can see that, for example, in the US, when a president comes and says, this is my understanding of a national interest, and they vote me on that, and he says, the previous president understanding of the national interest was faulty, was wrong. So this is my understanding. Now that becomes an issue. So is your understanding of the national interest as same as mine? So that when we are voting, we can actually vote and check. This is the second thing. So the voter understanding and education of the Kenya's national interest to me is vital. Second, again, I think that's my first. Second item I want to say is this, that if we are going to talk about those voters voting in 2027, we do have in this country a population. I think that population, by the projections we have, is about 55 million people. About 55 million. Out of the 55 million people, there will be those who will be eligible by the age. They will be eligible. They will be eligible to vote. Do we have an approximate number of that those people will be eligible? Actually eligible. Two, there will be those who will be eligible and a registered vote. Those who will be eligible and they do not register to vote. Either A, they are voter apathy, they are not interested, or they are interested, but they have been suppressed not to register. There are two groups. Whatever the case, they will not take part in the election. Now, if you end up with an election where both apathy, registration, and suppression end up with a total voter participation of 30% of the population, that election could be legal, but it would be legitimate. I am not sure. I'm leaving those because I leave to because I'm not very sure in my mind that if you get an administration which deliberately suppresses the voter, deliberately, and deliberately causes voter apathy as a tool of administrative management. Because here this meeting is to talk about administrative and management of the voters. They use those tools, so management and administration, to reduce voter participation to 20%. What would you tell me will be then the case now as far as the legitimacy of that political participation is? I'm just leaving you because I'm not very clear in my mind whether I've got an answer. Finally, this I think I don't know where this is here, but as I've been following this for many years, I ask myself that as far as I understand the Constitution, Prof, the election of the president, the tallying of the election of the president is at a constituency. Each of the 29 constituencies should declare who won the presidency in that constituency. And if you differ, you go and argue with that constituency. I can't see the need for a bomas myself, where you need bomas administratively and as a management. Now, to me, it will reduce administrative programs if everything is done and finalized at the constituency and the presidency is called in each and every constituency. And that is it. If you have a problem, you go to McQueen and argue whether they were right, not at Bomas. Finally, on trust. Is it possible to manage and administer a trust deficit? If from the first thing I got was to give you about 20% of the people who are taking part because of mistrust, how will you administer and manage a trust deficit in the population? Those are some of my issues. I'm getting this from a lot of the questions I get from my own grandchildren. So I'm just sharing this. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
You have to shout louder.
I would. So, number one, I'm really honored to be here, and I'd really just like to thank the speakers. So, from Peter to Jen to Angela to Anne and to Paul. Yes, the very wonderful moderator, Andy. So, I had two questions, and number one is about artificial intelligence, in which we are hopping and jumping, not really touching much on it. And it's on, do you know what, it's just a simple question. Do you know what deep fake is? Does anyone of you know what deep fake is? Deep fake, yeah. So some of you might know, some of you might not. So also for DeepSeek, and which they got together hand in hand, but for deepfake, I'll speak a bit about deepfake. So less than 3-4 weeks ago, or was it a month ago, our very own, was it not CS, Singoi, Korean Singoi, fell prey to the deepfake incident where he posted a video, and it was really controversial because he's at the highest point where much of the communication and intelligence about anything that he relays ought to be at the very most understand. If you think about it to the levels that I do, then we all have to be really concerned. So, for example, we are getting into an election period, and it's at the 11th hour of the elections. So some videos of probably the IEBC chairs goes around about him releasing results, and it's a deepfake video, but the public doesn't know. Much of the people in the local communities or the marginalized areas don't know about it, and they get concerned, and a rampage goes around. And that also goes to everyone is speaking about communication, and Madam Anne, you mentioned a bit about communication, about IEBC having a parallel body of handling its own communication, because communication works with trust, and trust works with restoring people's ability to understand what the government does, every single bit about what the government wants and how the government functions. So that's about artificial intelligence. And honestly, I really don't think we're ready for that. 2027 is coming fast. And also, during the session when they mentioned there's a window until the 18th month where everything cannot be implemented past that. During the 18th month, anything after that will be taken to the next election period. And it's really concerning. So it's something that we ought to work on. I don't know how. For me, it's just praying and hoping. But for me, who understands, I can only mobilize my team and my people and how we work with it. So number two, it's on the polls. For example, if polls select, if polls select a specific candidate, what are the needs of elections? Because polls deal with numbers, and numbers specifically relay. You get what I'm saying. Yes. So I mean, why would polls align to a specific candidate, especially if there is no proper communication? Yes. So yeah, that's from me. My name is Kiplimo Jeff. I am a director of many volunteering positions in very, very, very many places. Yes, and majorly I work with Palava International, which is a group that we are working on young people coming together in matters of cultural democracy and in terms of sustaining and building ourselves in a very, very fast and evolving world. So I also work, I've seen some few individuals from United Nations, UNESCO, Youth Forum, who we also work together, and it's really an honor to be here, and I really thank you. So let us expedite however we are working and work really harder, because the storm that is brewing isn't really fun. And yeah, I thank you and appreciate.
I'm not sure if it's working, but good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dot. I work for IFES. IFES is International Foundation for Electoral Systems. It's of course like everyone else. It's really an honor to be here. When you started the conversation outside, one of the things that we kept asking ourselves, you mentioned the stakeholders. I feel like there's one critical voice that you keep missing in this conversation, and that is the secretariat themselves. Many a times we lobby from a point of what is the commissioners, what the policy leads going to do, but we don't critically look at the secretariat, which is the drivers of the work and some of the things that we look at. For instance, if you look at IEBC at the time that it was formed, noting the need for transition, the typical age of recruitment at that time was about 30, 35. If you calculate right now, a good number of those people who are seasoned election experts are about to resign. Within this duration, there's been a freeze on hiring. How are we, as the people who are supporting the process, also lobbying for building the internal resilience of the commission itself? For instance, I would want to imagine a way that we lobby for the roles of the CEO. We've had many counties that have not had by-elections, and also the issue around registration. I mean, it's as simple as it just needed gazettement. To what extent did we even ourselves be proactive and ask for the courts to guide on some responsibilities that need to be totally administrative? I know after an election, the voter register is closed, and they say that they require the chairperson to do that. But we had an opportunity to go to court. We had an opportunity to say that the counties that do not have representation, surely they needed representation. We equally have an opportunity as civil society, was to ask ourselves, how do we support even boundaries delimitation? Ideally, if you look at the last law, we have 27 counties that, quote unquote, we consider their boundaries spent. And so what happens in the next election? If minors, our constitution provides for the number of counties, but if some of the boundaries are spent, what does that really mean? Secondly, there's also the issue of, there are rumors of a referendum. But if you look at the responsibilities of the chairperson, we created what is called a super chair. And so the event that, and I always like joking with some of my colleagues, Anne included, that assuming just before declaration, the chairperson say falls ill or is not able to declare the results, what happened to us? Because if you look at the qualification of the chairperson, it's defined in the constitution, which means that without a referendum, we don't know what would happen. And the argument might be maybe the county election manager for Nairobi should be, but that cannot happen. And so that also is also an opportunity to look at how do we support the commission and also kill the idea of a super chair. All other positions have a deputizing role, but somehow with the election commission, we are comfortable with a super chair. Last but not least, there's also the conversation hearing from everyone is on judicialization of elections, but also there's over legislation. And what I mean by that, the way I look at it is, if you look at the qualification of the chair and also the DRC, the resolution mechanism, it's quasi-judicial. The qualification of a chairperson in an election commission is similar to someone of, the High Court judge. But the election requires issues around legitimacy. And so many times the courts will give, a clean bill of health on our elections, but it fails the legitimacy test. And those are some of the things we need to ask ourselves, how do we balance that? I'll stop there. On the digital divide, again, with the opportunity around that, there's a huge digital divide. The group that is likely to take over and run the agenda or qualify to be in IBC, most of them are the digital, immigrants. They are not the digital natives. And then we have the digital natives, the so-called Gen Zs, who are demanding certain things that we are still going to rely on the legacy ways of approach, of even communicating, and then still ask ourselves, why do people do not trust the process? And so those are some of the, I'll stop there, but those are top of my head, what I've picked from this. Thank you. I don't know. I think it's
Yeah, thank you. I just want, by way of emphasis, to reiterate what my colleague has said about the result management. We have lessons to learn, and almost all the failures of our elections has been based on results management, at least since 2007. That is where the process. So we should emphasize that the results which are given the constituents are final, so that everybody can tally, and that will actually mean that you are having a people-centered election because the people are the constituents. They count them. Why is it that we still have to get bombers to review them? We should simply coordinate them. And for IFES and even UNDP, you have the good practices from other countries. I believe when we look at even American election, the elections end at the state. The electoral college is simply a kind of rubber stamps. Ideally, the boundary delimitation takes almost a year. Ideally, do we have that time? If the time is there, then it should actually be a priority so that they will even answer the question of this 40 and others. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sure you can catch me from that. This is a very simple question. We need to do domestic elections. We make it sound like a monster. The way to set up every polling center, polling station at 700 people. That's it, mathematics. So if you do basic mathematics, you should count 10 votes, 10 ballots per minute. Technically, it should take you 70 minutes to count one transmission. So if we just say, take it down to the basics, we don't need a standing commission every day. We don't need 61 billion, count 700 votes times 46. If we make it simple, we will avoid this.
Okay, interesting prospect.
Mine is a comment. Just to echo what my senior had mentioned, that the key focus is on voter. But while I'm here, I'm wearing two hats as a voter and also a representative of business membership organization. And for us as a BMO, I'm here for representing Kenya Association of Manufacturers. So for us, for businesses and also investors, the key aspect that comes out and what members would always ask, the disruptions that come if the elections are not managed. So as the IEBC leadership is coming in, I believe their entry will be very full. And I hope that part of the matrix that will be presented to them under the Uchaguzi platform is that they need to assure also the business community the stability that happens. Because for us, we also, there are some who are not in organized membership groups, so they're not able to get real-time updates. How are they being able to be accommodated so that the communication is right, so that it doesn't affect their businesses? But at the end of the day, disruptions in the trading, in the trade sector has a ripple effect. Because we find it affects the exports, the import, and also the local voter who needs to be able to feed onto that system. So that is also an angle that needs to be taken care of. In terms also of security, it needs to be also very clear on how this segment of the business community, as much as also voters are being taken care of, how are they being protected? Because the lack of confidence in terms of how certain are we that we're safe, that we can run operations right with no disruptions, as much as this mandatory exercise will be conducted and we continue business as usual. So the key will be ensuring that election dispute, there's timely and it's predictable. And then can we also just have alternative dispute resolutions? And then media independence will also be very crucial, and then for also real-time reporting. And as it has been echoed, strategic communication, I think also IBC needs to bring in some of the Gen Z. They might not share that idea. Yes, there are other very qualified people in the IT sector and all, but we find the Gen Zs have come out strongly, that they know more, they can tweak some of the aspects that relates with the minds of the people who are at that level. So they may need to bring them on board and be part of that team so that there's some neutralization that can take place.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. I think there's one more at the back. That mic can reach you.
Thank you. I hope I'm audible to everyone. So thank you very much for your contributions. I think I'm learning a lot just being in this panel. My name is Azarias from Milog. And I think that, okay, initially we had a model called the tyranny of numbers, but now I'm thinking now we're at a place where now we are in a terrain of numbers. And this is more or less for Angela, that I don't think that polls are a problem, if you ask me. I think that polls it's about the numbers. I think the key issue is what the story that you tell with the numbers. Because a lot of times we have an examination of numbers, but sometimes we don't ask ourselves the deeper questions behind those numbers. And sometimes what we think is a prima facie case sometimes ends up having a lot of nuance attached to it. And so I think maybe it would be very useful. One of the things we could really rely on you and the team of people who do numbers in Kenya, in whatever capacity, is to also be able to tell a better story with the numbers so that we're also able to be better informed, because we cannot ignore the role that pollsters and people who have who work with numbers in elections, we cannot ignore their role in elections because, for one, they don't just tell a story, they also influence. They carry the element of influence. So maybe that would be something to ask of you as well. The other thing is, I don't know, the terrain also where this explorations into numbers is occurring is also changing a lot. Right now, people can set up a poll on Twitter or on X, and probably you have maybe done something, and someone comes up, and sometimes you find that there's some bias to it because number one, the group that you're working with is number one biased, because number one, being on that platform implies some level of bias, and two, also the people who that person is sampling from would also be people who typically tend to be within the circles. But I don't know if you've also taken into account this even as you seek to do your work in polling, because I feel that this is one of the things you may need to take into account even as you seek to generate narratives that are coherent for the nation through your polling. Yeah.
Good. I think we've had a very stimulating conversation and contributions from the plenary. I am about to cede it back to my panelists, probably in the order of which they spoke, I think would be appropriate. A few parting shots on my end, even as I let the panelists speak. I think from the plenary, there's been a very interesting insight that adds on to the theme of civic education. So again, civic education reverberated through the panelists. But I think the interesting thing that came from the panel is also then an auditing aspect of the extent to which it elevates national values. So again, we are uniquely placed because our constitution emphasizes national values. I think for me, the question is, to what extent has our civic education and outreach efforts reflected or emphasizes national values? I think that's something to think about going forward. Again, this effective communication, strategic communication aspect keeps coming up. My only parting shot, as my panelists also engage, is I'm just going to voice a quiet concern. I hope that strategic communication and effective communication is not becoming an omnibus term that is doing a lot of heavy lifting for a lot of things. That when we say communication, we mean different things. And I only raise that concern because I feel I've sensed undertones of people really speaking about public participation. So it's not just what you're told, it's whether you actually participated in shaping that policy direction and that you are actually at ease with it, and therefore, it's about now telling them what the decision is. So that public participation aspect is very important. And then I think I also mentioned it earlier, it's about how responsive some of these policy positions or reforms are to what the public has actually prioritized. So don't just tell us you're busy doing different things. It's also about, are you actually dealing with the things the public have emphasized and prioritized? So boundary review, I think, is an area that has emerged quite a bit when we're talking about our march to 2027. So when we're talking about, what is in the IEBC entry, I think now we need to really think about boundary review and whether we are caught in a constitutional crisis by ignoring it. So that in everything else they will do, if they don't answer that question, are they being responsive? And even the wider stakeholders. I think there's the issue of technology again coming over and over again, and the questions that were raised about deepfakes. There's the question about how the currency of Gen Zs and the utilize. I think the only thing I would ask to the general wisdom of the panel is also to locate it back into context, because sometimes I do feel technological innovation. I've worked quite a bit in the advocacy aspect of this. It occupies a very loud space, but then let's put it into context. What are the numbers? What's the numbers in terms of access? If conventional media is still high trust and whatever, how do people access information basically still? So that we put it into context and not, again, overshoot or overcorrect and put a very high currency on technology and what it can do and ignore where the people actually are. So I think that's also something to think about. I think also the plenary distilled a lot of the issues and controversies that we are calling electoral dispute around results management. And so then again, there are some very interesting questions to reflect on. Do we stagger elections? Do we need a standing commission? Do we need BOMAS as a tallying center? I think those are interesting questions to reflect on. But I would stop at that. I won't try and summarize everything and cede the floor to the panelists. I'm only going to give you 1 minute because if I reopen the floor, now look. Now look. This is what I'm avoiding.
I don't want to. You have mentioned 3 words which give me a problem when they are wanting to respond. The values, which normally conflicts with national interest and the public interest. In the mind of many Kenyans, those 3 terms look interchangeable. They are not. And when you are addressing that, please.
Yes.
clarify.
Okay. You have 30 seconds.
30 seconds.
Yes.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Absolutely.
Okay, there's one thing that the results, election results management. And okay, if I were to say that about someone who's a bit less informed, who maybe we rely for information from us, can interrogate ourselves when it comes to IBC and the political leaders. What is the IBC election results total and the IBC election servers? If we can answer that, then definitely we'll answer this issue of election results outcome, the acceptance of election results. What is the election results portal and what is the IBC election servers? Thank you.
Good. I will not dare other than cede the floor to panelists.
Yeah, very well. I think in my short part, as I close, I have just isolated a couple of things that I describe as the factors that erode the social capital on our electoral processes and outcomes. You know, and the 3 things that I am able to pick, one, what we've talked about is lack of responsible and responsive action around our electoral processes and around our elections outcomes. And, you know, this is something that is underpinned by lack of accountability and transparency that is also, you know, coupled with the lack of ethical and moral considerations. And I think for me, these are the big issues that we need to deal with. Whether we are looking at the institutions, the actors in the electoral process, whether we are looking at the systems, the infrastructure, the structures, together with the tools that we use and deploy, including technology and AI. You know, if we don't have and if we cannot cultivate a culture that can prioritize and entrench these 3-4 typical things. One, responsible and responsive action that can lead to accountability and transparency, and that is underpinned by ethical considerations, then we will never find it right. Whatever we do will just be a window dressing, whether we communicate effectively or not. It will just be the usual thing, you know. And we don't just want to do the usual things. We just want to see some change. And that change revolves around how we can build institutions, we can create, generate actors, systems, and structures and tools that can deliver for us in a responsible, responsive manner. Responsible and responsive manner. So now, for example, if we are talking about the recruitment, and I think we have started on the wrong footing because we've even lost the word recruitment. We call it selection, right? And we know what selection means and how it plays in the minds of the people. And I don't even know how we ended up describing that panel as a selection panel, you know, because as we all know, what is happening is political horse trading on who the chair, you know, the seat for the chair should be reserved for who. The commissioners who should represent what regions, they are already selected. You know, it will just be a question of the panelists ticking the boxes, to ensure that the pass marks are met, and this is where we lose it right from the beginning, so that we end up with individuals, as Jane is describing, people who do not even understand what they are supposed to do, but are driven by the ethical factors that brought them to the institution. So they pledge their loyalty not towards the integrity and the credibility of the process and outcome, but rather to the political considerations that saw them get to where they are. And so for me, those are the things that we need to emphasize, and how to make citizens be the determinant for all this, whether it is at the level of institution, whether it is at the level of actors, systems, structures, and tools. How do we give power back to citizens so that accountability can be something that citizens take as a priority and entrench as a culture, and something that they can day in and day out demand and sing about the way they sing about Chapo now? Thank you.
So, told me it ends at 1:45 because people must go to lunch.
This will take 2 minutes. The first one you took right out of my mouth, because I was going to submit that actually the central, when you talk about responsive and effective communication, that really is the heart of the call for a threshold for public participation. And it's something, again, going back to April last year, was really made clear by the youth that it's not enough that we sit in a room and give our views. We want to know, what do you do with the views that we have shared? So I think for now, I won't say much, just suffice it to say that there is a bill currently on public participation, which is before Parliament took it to the Attorney General, with a call to the Attorney General to conduct public participation on the public participation bill. And this is the bill then, when it becomes law, that will set the threshold for what do we mean when we say we have undertaken public participation. Because currently there's a feeling that it's not as robust as it ought to be. I limit myself secondly to the point you raised, Andrew, in terms of projections for funding. I don't want to purport to speak for even my own institution or others around the table, but what I can say is it's
Guys, excuse me, just for a minute. Can I have your attention for a minute, please? For two things, we are breaking for lunch at 1:45. So please try to summarize. Number two is that lunch is served at the main restaurant. So please, when you're done, you go to the main restaurant. We'll be back at 2:30. So we all be back at 2:30 so that we can leave here before the next attempt to rain comes. Then the rapporteurs of each session, please remain behind to have a meeting with Dr. Wekesa so that we can consolidate and prepare for the afternoon session. Please proceed.
Yes. I was lamenting that if it's not nature, it's markers. Okay. No, I was saying we're in uncharted territory right now, right? In terms of the funding, given what has come out of the US, and the indications from other partners is there'll be similar movement. So it's a global, not a Kenyan thing. And it means we're doing a lot of thinking and reflection on what this means. It's impossible right now to say there'll be money or there won't be money. But I also would like to share that we took a study in after the 2022 elections. When I say we don't agree on elections, the study found is that they can help me here. What the study found is the funding of Kenyan elections is actually done by Kenya, i.e. the funding that comes from the partners is important, but over 80% of funding for Kenyan elections is actually by Kenya. It was eye-opening. I think what we hear that the IBC saying and calling for is hopefully it can come throughout the cycle, and because mostly it comes closer to, right? But I would say that for us, it's a lot of reflection and thinking going on, because they say don't waste a crisis. When you're in a situation like this, it forces you to think through. And a lot of the funding that is brought to the country for elections is what actually supports a lot of the work by civil society. So when I look at a meeting like this, I was telling Mule earlier that I'm actually impressed that in between an election, two elections, we can hold a meeting like this. Because previously we couldn't, because usually the funding would come, so it's quite impressive that a meeting like this can be held. So the long and short of it is our thinking caps are on. Many of the funders are talking globally of moving away from aid to trade. So what does that mean? And coming back, of course, to Kenya, I think it's to look and see the kind of allocations we've had in several sessions. The Commission Secretariat speaking to the need for the money to come even now and not wait only for when the elections are here. So I limit myself to that. But yeah, we are thinking and observing and trying to think through solutions for that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And I know you're almost lunch, so I don't want to stand between us and lunch, but two things. One, you asked me to comment on the voter apathy in the country. We are already seeing that between April and January, when I conducted the survey, and the institution trust has declined significantly. Just to mention, IBC 36 to 26, police 36 in our case to 23, judiciary 45 to 34. So it means they need to re-engineer this institution. There's no way we are going to hide our heads in the sand and assume that things are working. When you talk to the citizens, the reason for voter apathy, and we conducted this in our survey, one is whether people expect elections to reflect their opinion. For most Kenyans, they think actually only 52% of our respondents thought that elections reflected their opinion. So to me, it doesn't matter whether I vote or the trend you're witnessing now, where politicians are coming together after elections for purposes of managing the economy is not good. It's going to increase the voter apathy in this country, because we did because you supported either Kwanza or you supported Hakimi. But now they're the same table as we remain. So we need to rework on that and ensure that we educate our citizens. Lastly, is the timeliness of the institutions. We know it was not by accident that IBC did not have commissioner for the last 2 years, but we only see effort to fill these offices having happened in the election. I don't think someone is trying to gain a mileage. So we should have this entrenched in constitution or in clear laws when office is exiting. How soon can we have a replacement? We're already suffering, and a member of this team alluded to this, that we have many constituencies which were due for by-election, but without IBC commission, they could not. So that means those people have failed or have been denied democracy they much needed. If there was clear way of replacing or appointing the commissioner, it would have addressed this gap. So the trust deficit is high, and it's the high time we started working towards rebuilding trust. Thank you very much.
A minute.
I don't even know what to say, but yes,
Count you finally.
I agree with what was said about polls. I think moving forward as we edge closer to the election, we generally just need to sensitize the stakeholders. So the main one being the media, because the way people, internalize polls or consume polls is through mainstream media, but now also alternative media. So we need to have sessions with those two groups just to help them understand how to disseminate. Because whilst it was very right, we disseminate our information and give all the details, but the media will decide what it is that they will, air. And that then sometimes causes the sensationalism of the information. Do we feel safe or stifled? I think we feel challenged, like everybody should, in this digital age. The question is, how do you actually use digitality to improve? And as you asked the question, I thought to myself, people say Joe Rogan, the podster, won the election for Donald Trump. So if that be the case, what will happen in other, democracies? And even for ourselves, including forces and other people, how do we then use those kind of channels, the ones we're talking about, the influencers, the thought leaders, who are not as regulated as we have the others, but indeed they are going to be increasingly influential. I think in closing for me is the question. I know UNDP is here, I know this is donor funded. I always ask myself, when will we become a hegemony that does not rely on donor funding for elections? Because the person who funds your elections has an interest in who is going to eventually become the winner. And this we were told by the former governor of Darwa, was also the PS for security. What did he say? Francis Kimemia. Francis Kimemia's words are not just telling, they tell you a lot about how funding interfaces with elections. And it's something that is always silent. I close. In any case, we need the money from them.
And any closing thoughts? Thank you, everyone, for engaging in what I think was a robust conversation.
Sitting here by virtue of
Your lunch.
Thank you for moderating.
Say for the rapporteur, unfortunately, you have to engage in your supplementary meeting. But thank you all. Panelists? There's a request for a photo.
That is very important.
Marshall, Angela, there's a request for a photo of the panelists. There's a request for a photo of the panelists.
They're saying we take a photo.
Is there another milk card?
You can have this. I'll get the lady who did it. Another thing on this particular
And there, the government indicates its priorities. Yeah, and the government policies is informed by the medium term, the so
It becomes a very big place.
government